Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Capitol Preview. My name is Bill Peard. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Association. This show is brought in conjunction by Mediacom, and the purpose of the show is so we can talk to your House and senators from across Iowa to kind of give an idea of what's going on up at the Iowa legislature. Our guest this morning is Representative Chris Hall, Democrat from District 13. He represents Sioux City. Chris, it's good to see you this morning.
Glad to see you also, Bill. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so we'll just kind of start in and kind of, it's a casual conversation. And I think one of the more noteworthy proposals this year was introduced by the governor.
Yeah.
And could you explain the governor's proposal to increase the sales tax to fund Iowa's water and land legacy and its prospects?
Well, a lot of your viewers are probably familiar with the topic because it's been around for a few years.
Right.
The governor really deserves some credit for leading on the issue, and it's something that the legislature passed back in 2009. It was then approved by voters by 63% approval rating in 2010. So we've had this fund for coming up on a decade, and it's been sitting empty. But if funds were actually put into it, we know that it would help resolve a lot of the challenges our state faces. Mm-hmm. We're talking about water quality, air quality, our state parks, our trails, and a lot of the real community enhancements that cities are looking at right now. It's a full package, but the governor's proposal is unique. In her condition of the state address, she laid out some of the things that she thought would be required in order for her to fund that. That includes switches to mental health regions, changes in how they're funded, an increase to the sales tax, and also a decrease to income tax. In total, the governor's proposal binds together a lot of really big topics, and it's about $500 million worth of revenue that shifts within the state budget if her proposal comes to bear. Mm-hmm. I would say the interesting thing over the last few weeks following her proposal has been really watching how people react to it. I think that it's a good thing to discuss. It's something that voters certainly are interested in and want the legislature to act on. But the governor's proposal also is so large that I wouldn't be surprised if it gets broken up and we see certain pieces of it move forward, or also it may actually be a bit of a rift between the governor and her own Republican legislators. They don't necessarily like the idea of raising sales taxes, especially in an election year.
Right.
And I know that that's a sticking point for them. And for Democrats, it's a sticking point as well that it would make our sales tax and taxation in the state much more regressive, impacting working families more than others.
Very good. You mentioned a recent presentation by the Iowa State University on climate change to weather and agriculture in Iowa. What is happening to the Iowa weather?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the best parts of getting to serve in the legislature is the opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
And it was really fascinating this week to have heard two Iowa State professors speak to the Natural Resources Committee. What they told us is that 2019 was the wettest year on record in Iowa's history. And it was about 16 more inches of precipitation than our state averaged between 1980 and 2010. So we're seeing up to 16 inches more precipitation in a given year than we have. And that impacts a lot of our state's agricultural economy, as well as just the average person's day of life. The concern that they really wanted to tease out and inform us on is that we're going to see water continue to become more prevalent. It's going to be increasing humidity and increasing rain and snow, and especially with the likelihood of more floods in winter and spring. Why does that matter? Because if you see more flooding in the spring, if you see more just kind of soil that is completely inundated with moisture, it makes it harder to plant. It means that you're getting your crops in the ground later, potentially impacting your yield. Mm-hmm. But those crops also end up needing potentially more fertilizer, and that compounds a lot of the soil loss and water quality issues that we're seeing. So it's good for us to be aware of But we also have to really recognize that these are huge challenges on the horizon. They're complex, they hit the heart of our economy, and we need to make sure that the legislature is thinking them through.
So then, Chris, is this global warming? I mean, is this a offshoot of?
I spent most of the last year out crisscrossing the state doing soup suppers and visiting with farmers and biofuels manufacturers. They recognize that this is a feature of climate change. We might not all buy into the same vernacular or use the same phrases, but if you're out there and your livelihood depends on working the land, or if you're even in an industry that ties into it, you understand that this is a long-term trend and that this is going to continue to impact your work. It's the first sign, but it also needs to be something that we plan for, and some of that might come into play today as we're discussing some flood mitigation, flood relief dollars in the legislature.
Yeah. The House and the Senate are considering an additional $20 million for flood relief, which you just got in referencing.
Yep.
Tell us why that funding is so critical right now.
Well, this last year especially points out that flooding is a statewide issue. This isn't something that's relegated to western Iowa or eastern Iowa and the Mississippi near Davenport and some of those communities that saw flooding. We're seeing it up and down west to east throughout the state. And we know that flooding is something that state and local government really have to work together on. $20 million is a shot in the arm, and it will help some of these communities get back to where they were at. We have a lot more funds that we expect we'll have to put in order to work with all of these different pieces of the puzzle and fitting the dollars together locally, state, and federal to make sure that the projects are funded. But looking forward, we also have to make sure that communities are planning for levee infrastructure, that we're doing good agricultural research at our state universities, and that we know if climate change is going to continue and flooding is going to become more prevalent, we are well planned for it, and we're not just each time trying to rebuild back to where we were. We're building better, we're building stronger as well.
School funding is another big important thing that everybody talks about every session. House versus Senate Republicans are not in agreement, and the Democrats also have a different number. Why does that matter?
This is, it's one of those kind of legislative dances that happens each year where somebody floats their number, another group in the Capitol kind of says, well, we understand, but we see it a little differently. So right now you've got the House and the governor that have provided a 2.5% increase for school funding, and the Senate has come in a little bit leaner and they've said only 2.1%. The reason that matters is because we've seen a historically long period of time where schools have been underfunded. For the last decade, the average has been somewhere around 1.5%. And if you think about inflation and especially the cost of doing business in a school district, the intense resources that it takes to hire good teachers, keep them there, and also have them educating a classroom and a size of a classroom that allows them to give each student one-on-one time. Inflation is 3% plus, and if we're only funding these schools at 2% or 1.5% over the last decade, they're not getting to where they need, and we know that classroom sizes have gotten bigger. The other part, and a lot of taxpayers in my district appreciate this, the more funds that the state provides to school funding, the less funds are needed from property taxes. And so if you're talking about more funds coming from the state, that means a lot to the people in Sioux City in a historically property tax high kind of community, and they realize that putting dollars from the state in ends up saving them on their property tax bill. That's important.
It absolutely is, yeah. For several years, you've worked on the issue of anti-bullying legislation.
Yes.
And are introducing a bill once again. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, back in 2015, there's a lot of good attention given on the issue of anti-bullying. Governor Branstad was still in office at that time, and to his credit was working across the aisle with Democrats to hopefully address the issue. What's changed with bullying in our schools is the prevalence of cyberbullying, the ability of kids to be mean to each other, to impose upon one another, and to do so either with greater anonymity or not even during the school day. but it still impacts the child who's receiving it throughout their day, whether they're at school or not. This bill that we introduced in 2015 passed through the Senate with a strong bipartisan vote, but it fell short in the House. And working with some different groups like Iowa Safe Schools, my senator, Jackie Smith, and myself, both from Sioux City, are introducing the same bill with some very slight modifications that was passed in 2015. We'd like to make another go-round on it, and we know that cyberbullying is just as devastating to these kids as it was then.
Absolutely.
So we really need to work on it and hopefully see some new momentum.
So what do you think about the prospects of it passing? You think?
We have a new speaker. We have a different majority in the Senate. It will take work, but that's nothing new to me.
Right.
I've served in the minority now for 10 years.
Right.
And it means that you have to be persistent, you have to be respectful, and you have to build relationships. And that's how you get things done.
We could learn from you
Well,
nationally.
Right. We're lucky here in Iowa. It's a good process, and we still have good people who are doing it.
Right. One proposal I'm working that you're working on is to double the funds to enhance the Iowa program, formerly known as CAT.
Yep.
Grants, Community Attraction and Tourism. Why is that program such a success?
CAT grants have been around since the early 2000s in Governor Vilsack's time. They used to be what was called Vision Iowa. Now they've been rebranded, and it's now called Enhance Iowa is the programs. Similar operation though, and they go toward all these really wonderful community focal points and things that communities are proud of. It's the kind of stuff that enhances tourism. It brings people to a community. Or if you live there, in my case in Sioux City, we're really interested in redeveloping our riverfront. It's something that was kind of dismantled during interstate construction. It has the potential to be a beautiful park, and we know that people would use it if we put some dollars in. And it's a perfect opportunity for the state to consider what helps these communities put themselves on the map, what helps them market themselves better and retain their population, what makes it an attractive place for people to live and work. And these programs do a great job at vetting them, helping them think through the planning process, and also giving them a cost share. It's a diligent group, and it would be great to have them with a little bit more funds to hopefully approve all of the different applications that come in each year rather than let them wait list.
Part of my past life was mayor of Waukee, and
Yes.
and so I'm familiar with CAT grants, and they're a great tool. Yeah. So
Great for economic development and
Right.
also just, I think, moving to the next century of what communities look and feel like.
right.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of we're out of time. Representative Hall, I appreciate you coming in here this morning and sharing with us a lot of important things that are going on in the legislature and that you're behind and working on. So we appreciate your due diligence in Iowa, because we know you're a great representative. So,
Well, thank you.
so our guest today was Representative Chris Hall, from a Democrat from District 13, Sioux City. So thank you for tuning in, and please join us for another episode of Capitol Preview.